Mill Hollow, the move that doesn't warn. Olena arrived in the village of Struminets not by her own will. She had been transferred, temporarily for 6 months, to coordinate an educational project for children from depressed regions. 38 years old, city-born, with the character of a teacher and tired eyes, she expected the assignment to be an unpleasant but fleeting joke. The house they provided for her stood on a hill, an old wooden cottage with a stone basement. The village looked like a frozen frame, silent people, one shop, no laughter. But she was prepared. She had always been prepared. "The main thing here is not to ask too many questions," said the village head, a man with a pale face and pauses that lasted too long. "What do you mean?" "Some things here. They're not for outsiders." Her new home had a strange feature. Everything she left in one place in the evening was found somewhere else in the morning. Books, kitchenware, sometimes even her notebook. She thought it was just an adjustment issue. But when she saw the curtains drop by themselves in the middle of the night, something tugged at her. The school was old but functional. The children were silent, unnaturally obedient, with the same phrases. It was like a rehearsal. They looked at her as if they knew something she didn't. "Have you heard yet?" asked a boy with large eyes named Artem. "In our village, you can't open the windows after 9. "Why?" "Because then the roof starts to watch." "What?" "The roof, it knows when you wake up." Olena pretended not to hear. The next morning she found a scrap of paper on her bed. It read, "You woke up in someone else's house, act accordingly." She looked around the room. In the mirror, her reflection. Blinked at the wrong moment. An old woman stood in the hallway, silent, still. She just stared. Olena opened her mouth to ask who she was, but she had already disappeared. And so began the assignment that was supposed to last 6 months, and every night in that house made it feel less and less like temporary housing. It started to look like a place she had always lived in. What watches? Helen woke up every night precisely at 3:11. The numbers on the clock glowed with red malice. The house was quiet, too quiet, even for a village. Mill Hollow seemed abandoned, but by day everything was in place. Children at school, the elderly on porches, bread in the store. Except for the eyes. People here almost never blinked. She began noticing the small details. For example, the wardrobe in the bedroom was always open in the morning, although she distinctly remembered closing it. The mirror in the hallway was always slightly crooked. And the sounds. A low hum, like an old refrigerator. But she didn't have one. On the 4th day, she noticed that the photos on her phone were changing. Subtly. For example, a spot appeared on the kitchen floor in one picture. Then another. In the next, a shadow behind the window. But she was sure she was alone. Helen turned to the school psychologist, Mr. Green. "I'm noticing things. Unusual things. Have you been here long?" "Long enough not to ask such questions," he replied, not taking his eyes off his notebook. "Excuse me? You'll be better off if you accept one thing. Mill Hollow is not for explanations. But have you dreamed of the path with light yet?" She froze. "Where?" Everyone sees it before they start to feel the gaze. That night, she had the dream. A narrow path covered in dim light, with shadows, not human shapes, but like elongated forms that watched. The next morning, she found a note in her desk drawer. Printed in bold letters, "Don't open the attic." The problem was, she didn't even know there was an attic in her house. She went upstairs. On the ceiling was a square painted over with white paint. But the paint was fresh. The ceiling itself was slightly curved, as though something was pressing from inside. And then, deep inside, she heard a knock. Slow, rhythmic. Someone was there. And they were waiting. The attic that breathes. Helen stood for a long time under the painted hatch. The ceiling wasn't just bending, it seemed to be breathing. A gentle rising and falling, as if the house had its own lungs. She bought a ladder from the local shop. The salesman, a burly man in a shirt with rolled-up sleeves, didn't charge her for it. "If you decide to go up there," he began. "Yeah? Just don't look back." "Why?" "Because if you see who's following, you won't be able to turn back." That night, Helen didn't sleep. The ladder stood in the middle of the room, pointing upward. The hatch was no longer just a square. It seemed to have expanded. Finger marks were visible along its edges. At 3 o'clock, she went up. Dust. Silence. The smell of old wood and something else. Wet fur. In the attic, there were things that hadn't been in the house before. A leather suitcase, a faceless doll, old textbooks with the name Helen Smith, her name. But she had never seen them. On the wall, a faded photo collage, people with empty faces, but one face, clear, hers. In the center of the room stood an old rocking chair. In it sat a woman. She didn't move. Her eyes were closed, but the face, an exact copy of Helen's. The woman opened her mouth and said a sentence that Helen hadn't heard since her mother's death. "Don't leave the light on for them." On the floor, someone had scratched, "All who open, become them." She rushed downstairs. The next morning in class, Eli came up to her with a drawing. It depicted the attic, the hatch, and 2 Helens. "Which one are you?" he asked. I'm the teacher." "No, the teacher was yesterday. Today, it's the other one." She clenched the drawing so tightly that the paper tore. That evening, she packed her things. She wanted to leave, but the car wouldn't start. Her phone had no signal, and then she saw, in the car mirror, sitting in the back seat, herself, but with a different look. Empty. Windows that lead inside. Helen didn't remember how she got home, but in the morning she woke up in bed, fully clothed, with scratches on her arm. Her phone was turned off, but on the screen was one message: "You're already here." She decided to leave the house. She walked through the center of Mill Hollow, but no one paid attention. People sat on benches like mannequins. In their eyes, no soul, no movement. One of the men whispered, "When you duplicate, the original disappears." "What? They're already inside. You're just a shell." She ran to the school, but there she was greeted by the headmistress, Mrs. Langford. "Miss Smith, you shouldn't be here. Your place is at home. Do you know what's there? What's in the attic? Don't call it an attic. It's the room of memory." "Memory of what?" "The memory you repressed." Helen ran out. In the school window's mirrors, she saw herself, but her reflection didn't match her movements. One flickered, one stayed still, and in one of them, she turned and saw the other, Helen, smiling. On her door there was now a sign: "Resident, Helen Smith, arrival 2004. But she had arrived only a few weeks ago. She opened the wardrobe. Again, things that didn't belong to her. A diary, her handwriting, the entry, "If I've forgotten who I am, please remind me I'm alive." She read those lines over and over again, and realized she had already been here. Once, and had forgotten. Many times. In the window she saw a child, Eli. He was standing in the yard drawing. When she approached, he handed her a new sheet. It showed a scene of her sitting in the attic. And another drawing, her looking out from the house window, but there was no glass. The window was inside. "You're already inside," Eli said. "What's outside?" "Those who haven't forgotten." "Are you one of them?" "I'm a watcher, but soon I'll have to become you. If you forget completely, how do I leave?" "You need to remember that day." "What day?" "The day you first opened the attic." And then Helen heard a knock, but not from above. From her own heart. I remember Helen sat in the living room. She had covered all the mirrors with blankets, nailed all the cabinets shut, but the noise wouldn't go away. The knocking, the whispering, her own breathing in her ears. She found the last letter in a book she didn't remember. Memory is a corridor. If you walk through it to the end, you'll see yourself before everything began. She went back up to the attic. This time it was empty, just the chair, just the mirror. And the notebook. The pages were blank, but her fingers began to write on their own. She saw herself, younger, scared, just arrived. She saw the first entry, the first drawing, the first night when someone touched her forehead in a dream. She saw herself asking, "Where am I?" And the answer, "You're home." But it wasn't her home. And now, the last scene. Little Helen, about 6, at night in the attic, sitting by the hatch. Next to her, a woman with her face. And that woman says, "You must leave me. Only then will you save yourself." But who am I without you? Someone new. And the child leaves. The woman closes the hatch. Helen closed her eyes. When she opened them, the sun was shining through the windows. The house was empty. Truly, no shadows, no noise. She went downstairs. Outside, movement. Children were laughing. People were greeting each other. Eli ran up to her. "Do you remember now?" "Yes." "Don't let her return." "Her?" "The one who was you." "She." "She ran away because you remembered." Helen stood at the doorstep. She knew this wasn't the end. But now she had memory, and with it, a choice.